We are in the book of John in chapter 9 tonight. Book of John, chapter 9. We have been in a little bit deeper of conversation as far as Jesus goes. We're going to have a miracle we're going to look at, which is going to branch into some more deeper topics. And it's going to have to do with suffering and sin and so forth, and allow us some opportunity to talk about some of those things. But in John chapter 9, down in verse 1. Now as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Now, when we look at these verses and we just open up the conversation, this isn't the Pharisees. This isn't just people who are walking around. This is his disciples who are asking this question. And they ask a simple question. They see the man who's blind, and they have concluded what is the case.
He must deserve it.
Yeah, something happened. Someone's being punished. Okay? Either the parents sinned or this man sinned. Now, this is something that is a concept that is probably as old as, basically the garden, but it's one that we still struggle with even today. Even when we know better, we still kind of assume these things. So we'll think, if someone's going through something terrible, they're being punished, and if someone's living high in life, God is blessing them. And that's not always the case. Can that be the case? Yes. But Jesus is going to show us here in this instance that's not the case. When we look back to like the story of Job and all the suffering he went through, was it because of his sin? No. It was because God allowed it to happen. And as a matter of fact, one of the most interesting things in that book, if you've ever studied that book, is God never actually tells Job why he has to go through everything. He just tells him to trust him. So it's kind of an opportunity for us to talk about some of these things, because not just like they struggled with this, people before them struggled with this, people today struggle with this. There are a lot of people who don't believe in God because tragedy befell their family, and they don't think a loving God would allow someone who in their mind is innocent, though none of us are innocent, to suffer. There's all kinds of things that branch off this. They're in the same boat. So they ask, who sinned? And that leads us into this conversation. So verse 3. Jesus answered, neither this man nor his parents sinned. Now, is he saying these individuals are without sin? No. What is he saying?
Their sin didn't kind of...
Yeah, their sin isn't why this man is blind. Right. Okay. Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. God had a meaning for this. God had a reason for this. Does that mean every time someone goes through something difficult that God has a particular reason for it? Not necessarily. Okay? So again, we don't want to extrapolate too much. We just know in this instance, and Jesus is going to explain that this is meant for him to come and show his work. Look at verse 4. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. And when he had said these things, he spat on the ground, made clay with the saliva, and anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. And he said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent, which is kind of interesting. So he went and washed and came back seeing. All right. But there's a lot going on here. Obviously, there's a miracle going on here. That's probably the biggest piece. But let's go back and talk about the frame of this whole incident. Will we always know why someone goes through what they go through? No. We won't always. If Jesus wasn't here to explain it, that person who's blind, their parents, the disciples, nobody would know why this man was blind. That's just true. There are going to be times where we just don't understand, don't know why someone is going through things. And we've got to be careful, if you remember, again, to go back to the book of Job, and not become those friends who came to give him advice, right? If you remember, they sat with him for several days, said nothing. That's when they were truly friends. But then they started talking, and they assumed the same thing that these individuals did, that if Job was suffering, he must have sinned, and he needed to repent. And that wasn't the case. It was something none of them understood. All right, so Jesus is going to say, and we'll open this up for conversation here in just a moment. Jesus makes this declaration in verse 4, I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. We're using a little bit of a metaphor, but Jesus is saying that these things are purposeful. He's doing the things that God sent him to do. Okay? And there is coming a day where he's not going to be there to do them anymore. So what is he trying? I think he's trying to make sure they get the point. This is for you all to learn. This is for us to learn, and make sure we get it, because there's coming a time where these things won't be done. Obviously, those came to an end. We need to learn from these as they did. And when he had said these things, he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva and anointed the man's eyes, sent him to this pool. There's several pools in Jerusalem. Sent him to this particular one, washed it off, and he could see. So as we're looking at that, what comes to your mind? Questions or thoughts, or what's your sheer take? Why is this story, among other stories that could be here, in this place? What is it trying to teach us?
That if we do what Jesus wants us to do, that we can do better.
Okay.
I mean, the man could have said, okay, he told me to go to this pool, but he could have gone to some other pool.
Okay.
Would it have worked? Because he didn't go to the pool that Jesus told him to go to?
Right. Probably not. We've got the story of Naaman in the Old Testament that was told to dip 7 times in Jordan. But yeah, okay. So if we want the blessings of God, we've got to do the things of God. What else y'all take from this? Or questions that it brings up?
Well, I mean, it likens to a lot of the conversation that happens with unbelievers today. When you see kids sick or in children's hospitals, and you're like, well, why did God, that's so good, allow these things to happen? And here's a guy that was blind all his life, and they're assuming they know the answer to why he has that affliction, and he wants us to understand that faithfulness and trust in him is important.
Okay.
For not just ourselves, but for others that see us.
Yeah.
And a lot of people do that. They say, I understand my loved one has a sickness and they're dying, but how am I going to react to that? Am I going to turn against God, or am I going to let God shine through that?
Yeah. It brings up hard things, doesn't it? Hard things that people struggle with. Real things. With pain and suffering. I don't know how to prove this. I don't know. I've heard this said, but I'm just going to put it out there. You all can do your own research, whatever. But supposedly there was a survey that was done, and because it's kind of countering the atheistic thought. If there was a good, loving God, then there would be no suffering. So I said, okay, so who's around the most suffering? They surely are not believers. So they did a survey of nurses working in children's hospitals, like Crosairs and St. Jude's and things like that. There's a higher percentage of believers in those places than there are in the average hospital. And I just find that interesting. Now I know some of them have some religious tenets to the founding of them, but for the most part, they're, people, they don't hire based on religious tenets. They just hire whoever's available and is willing to do the job and so forth. But the people who spend around the most innocent people who suffer the most weren't atheistic. They were more believers. See, there is something interesting about when we see suffering. Not that it's good. I'm not trying to say suffering is good. But we do get a chance to see something many times that's incredible. When you see someone overcome, what does that do? let's put ourselves in this man's shoes. He was born blind, and then Jesus comes and gives him back sight, or gives him sight. What about this man the rest of his life?
Well, he should be thankful that God took care of him.
Everywhere he goes, that story is going to follow him, isn't it? Right? The lame man that was raised, the withered hand, the man saved from leprosy, all these different, doesn't mean that all of them stayed faithful, but it's just that reality. It's something that connects with us because it doesn't seem like you should be able to go. And we know these stories too. We see people who are not got a good prognosis, and maybe the doctors have said A, B, and C is going to happen, and it doesn't, and we're just in awe and so forth. But the reality is it's not always about a particular sin or lack of sin or whatever. Sometimes things are just a part of this world. And what do we get to see through it? Well, how do we respond to it? That's what we get to see. Do we get to see God through the loving hands of those who care and serve? Or do we get to see worldliness and the despair and the lack of hope that we see in so many? It is a really tough one that I don't have all the answers for. And Scripture does set up several possibilities of why people suffer. We already talked about one with Job and this one. God specifically said these things were happening so God could show forth his work. In Job's story, it was the faithfulness of Job. And I hate to give this as an example because, this could be happening with us too. When Satan came to Job, he said, well, consider my servant Job, how faithful he is. And Satan says, it's only because you take care of him. And he said, basically, take all that away, and he'll still be faithful. So God just used Job to prove Job's own faithfulness, which is kind of an odd thought, but it teaches all of us. Might we suffer at times? Might we go through things at times because other people are watching how we go through it? I don't know. That's true with Job. It seems to be true in this story that this man was blind and had to deal with that all of his life for this very moment. So Jesus could show forth who he is. Are there people who in the past, and maybe even in the present, who are suffering because of their own sin? Absolutely. That can also be true. So again, it's not a one-size-fits-all answer here, but it is a pause to remember, okay, we may be going through something. It is a good time to evaluate where we're at in our faith and our relationship with God. But it is the best time also to make sure we're trusting in Him. Any other questions or thoughts or something you see in this text before I pull up a few things? Okay, let's take it past this man. Go look at, with me again, verse 8. Therefore the neighbors, maybe I didn't read this a second ago. Let's go ahead and read it. Sorry. Therefore the neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind said, is not this he who sat and begged? Okay, there is no, safety net in this culture. There is no Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid or things like that. If you were basically handicapped, you're pretty much dependent on your family or begging. And this man begged. So he begged and they passed him. How many times did they pass him? How many times did they pass him and didn't want to be bothered by his situation and look the other way? And now they see him walking and can see and carry on. See, his life impacts more than just him, doesn't it? It impacts all those around him. So as we continue to read verse 11, and he answered and said, a man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. So I went and washed and I received sight. And then they said to him, where is he? And he said, I do not know. All right. Let's talk about this idea of what Jesus is trying to place in front of us about pain and suffering but about who God is. When you think of God, we just talked about God the Father past 2 weeks. We talked about him being a loving Father 2 weeks ago. Last week we just talked more in general about his divine sovereignty, about creation and so forth. When you think of God, what's some of the first things that come to your mind?
Love.
Okay, love. Forgiveness, okay. Anything else pop to anybody else's mind? Justice or just, okay. Power is one that pops to my mind pretty quick. The word above, or if we use a fancy word like transcendent, but he's just so far above us. I don't mean just the location. I mean just in his existence, right? That comes to my mind. And look how intricately he is involved in the affairs of men. Not only did Jesus come in, put on flesh, and here in this moment is busy about doing his Father's work, but this man, his life, his family, and all those around him are a part of that same work, even if they didn't realize they were, even if they didn't think they were going to be. Obviously, they didn't know they were going to be, right? What does it say about us? What do we attribute to the work of God in our life? Do we only attribute the things like when we go to church or when we give or when we take the worship elements in various form? Is that what we think of, or do we think of our life as a whole? The people we interact with, the examples we leave, the opportunities God has to work through those examples and those words and that teaching. See, that's what I hope we also get from this. This is not just, this man was blind and he was healed and yay, Jesus is powerful. That's true. But look at all the people who are being impacted by this. Matter of fact, it's even going to turn to opposition against Jesus. We'll get into the second part of this. For now, it's all good. When we talk about Jesus, though, I found this to be true, and I feel like we can prove this in Scripture. I feel like anecdotally, I can prove this in our lives in most cases. But I don't think you can just ignore Jesus. I'll give you this as my anecdotal evidence, and that's not completely the right term, but surface evidence, if you want, circumstantial evidence. People complain a lot, and have over the years, that there's a lot of religious tenets and things that people do, maybe the Muslim faith or other faith, and it doesn't seem like people are as critical, but everybody seems to go after Christianity. Well, some will say, well, that's because Christianity in the West has been kind of in the office of authority for a long time. It's the prevailing thought and paradigm. I don't. Maybe that is partly true. I think this is more true. You just can't ignore him. People couldn't in his day. They couldn't I can't, whatever. You're either going to follow him or you're going to reject him. There's not really an in-between. Most people just are going to react to who he is, what he stands for, and what he represents. And it's amazing to me how many people can be so vitriolic towards a God who is willing to put on flesh and die for them. But it happens, and we're going to see that happen here. How could you be upset with a man who just gave a man sight who hadn't had sight all of his life? In what context does that make sense to be mad at that person? And yet, that's exactly what's going to happen. We're going to, because guess what day it is? It's going to be the Sabbath day. So we can't break them traditions. I mean, I've seen more harm done, more breakups, more splits over traditions and hurt feelings than over doctrine. It happens over doctrine too, but this has been several years ago. But there was a church that split over the color of the carpet. And I don't know to laugh at that or to cry at that. I'm just sharing with you the reality that we get bent out of shape a lot of times over traditions more than we do the Word of God. And again, we're going to see this again. He did a miracle. Everybody knows it. But their tradition of how they held the Sabbath, not actually what God taught about it, is going to make them upset. So look at verse 13. They brought him who was formerly... let me start over. I can't talk tonight. They brought him who formerly was blind to the Pharisees. Now it was a Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. And then the Pharisees also asked him again how he had received his sight. And he said to them, he put clay on my eyes, and I wash, and I see. Therefore some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath. Others say, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? And there was a division among them. They said to the blind man again, what do you say about him because he opened your eyes? And he said, he's a prophet. Right? But the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received his sight until they called the parents of him who had received his sight. So they're trying to question him, trying to whatever. They're upset because he's done it on the Sabbath again. They're split and divided over it. Now they're like, well, maybe he wasn't actually blind and this isn't real. So they called the parents in. Now, this is your son who's been blind all his life. You would think that all of a sudden he could see, you'd be ecstatic.
Yes.
Right? I mean, I would. All right, verse 19. And they asked them, this is the parents, the Pharisees asking the parents, saying, is this your son who you say was born blind? How then does he now see? Listen how his parents answered. His parents answered them and said, we know that this is our son and that he was born blind. But by what means he now sees, we do not know. Or who opened his eyes, we do not know. He is of age. Ask him. He will speak for himself. You would think they'd be singing praises. They're like, oh, we're out of this. I mean, they are so afraid of breaking tradition and being kicked out of the synagogue. And I say that synagogue loosely. I know we're in Jerusalem in this picture, so the synagogue doesn't really exist. It's the temple. The synagogue, if you don't know what those are, they were built in the kind of the Greek time right after that, where they couldn't go and worship, so they built these little buildings, like church buildings, in communities, and that's where they would go on the Sabbath to worship. And then it became a thing that lasted all through, well, even to the day. So it's kind of like a local community church or gathering spot. Okay? Well, that community, based on that synagogue, built your community. So if you were dismembered, basically, from that, you couldn't be involved at all with the community. You couldn't trade. You weren't supposed to, show up at a wedding or a family event or whatever. You were discommunicated. And I think that's what's happening here. They're so afraid of that happening that even though their son can now see, they're like, oh, I don't know. You ask him. He's old enough, he can answer for himself. It is amazing how much this tradition is keeping them from being honest with what's happening. Now, think about our world and how we don't have a live moment miracle like this. It's how much harder it is to break through traditions when Jesus couldn't even break through them with miracles in his day.
It kind of shows how power corrupt they were. The people were so afraid of what they do.
Yeah.
And the same goes back to why they got mad. Well, they were jealous of his power and what it might mean for them later down the road if they lose their position where they were.
Yeah. Look at verse 22. So the text is going to come out and say this. I'm not just, you don't have to take my thought on the parents for it. Verse 22, his parents said these things because they feared the Jews. For the Jews had agreed already that if anyone confessed that he was Christ, he would be put out of the synagogue. It didn't matter what he did. They'd already decided. This happens a lot with a lot of things. I'm just using this as an example. I don't like to get into politics. I'm just using it as an example. And if you want to know where I stand on those things, I'd gladly talk to you. But I don't normally from pulpit or lessons. I'm just using. If you talk and see and watch whatever party you're in, whatever you think on politics, and you watch how views change based on the letter next to the name. And you watch how one person does something similar, and they have the letter that they're not the fan of, and how it is the end of the world, they come down, and then someone else on the other team with their letter next to it, and they are just making all kinds of excuses for why it's not that big of a deal. That's what's happening in this. They've already made their choice. They've already made their decision. This Jesus in their eyes is bad. Doesn't matter what he does. And if you say anything good about him, you're gone. That's a lot of pressure on a family who's trying to survive in a hard place, in a hard time. And that's what's happening here. But it's not about doctrine. It's about tradition. It's about power. It's about all these things on the surface. And those things still exist today. Sometimes really, really bad in some places. There are some places right now in Africa, if you don't pay attention to the news, where those, I'm not saying that they have everything down right, but they at least proclaim a Christianity, are being systematically slaughtered. It gets no news time. That stuff's still happening in the world today. It's crazy, it's sad, it's terrible, but the reality of our world is, people make up their mind, and when they make up their mind, they're willing to do some really crazy stuff, which here, remember in the last chapter when we left off, they were already trying to kill him, and now they're trying to discredit anything that comes around that shows forth credit towards Jesus. And again, this isn't a stranger from a town, the next town down the road. He is from there. They know him. The people know him. They have watched him beg. Remember the comment, the question? So how do you get all these people to, stay quiet? All right, let's go back in the text. Verse 22 is where we left off, where we have the threat that was already made, and they were afraid. Verse 23, therefore his parents said, he is of age, ask him. So they again called the man who was blind and said to him, give God the glory. We know that this man is a sinner. Now watch this. I love this when this stuff happens. Now, who are the questioners, the trial people here? The Pharisees. We've talked a little bit about this. Who is this group? In society, who would they be? Yeah. Yeah, this is the Jewish elite. I mean, the Sadducees would be too. These are the educated. These are the scholars. These are the lawyers. These are the theologians and so forth. These are the ones everybody looks up to. This is a blind beggar. You tell me here after we read these next couple verses, who has better theology, better understanding of theology? The blind beggar or these men? All right? They call him back in. They say to him, give God the glory. We know that this man is a sinner. Now, they don't know that this man is a sinner because he's not a sinner. And Jesus has always been trying to give God the glory for everything he does. But look at the answer, verse 25. Whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. He's just met him. One thing I know, that though I was blind, now I see. You can't argue with the reality that I can see. I was blind and now I can see. Explain that. Whose theology is better in this moment? Verse 26. Then they said to him again, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And he answered them, I told you already, and you did not listen. That seems to be a problem. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples? I love this man. I don't know who he is, but I love this man. It's like, my life has been terrible anyway, so where else can I go? But he is arguing. His parents are scared to death of these people. Is this a man that is pleased to be able to see again, or to be able to see? Absolutely. By the way, we sing a song, don't we? Amazing Grace. I was blind and now I see. Where does that come from? This man. What's his name? I have no idea. What happens after the story? I have no idea. But I know in this moment, all the elitism, all the we know best, all that, he doesn't care. He says, argue with the fact that I was blind and now I can see. And I love that statement that he makes right after that. I told you already. Why do you want to hear it again? And do you want to become his disciples too? I mean, you know. In other words, did you see what happened in that statement? What did he become? Let's go back into the statement. Do you also want to become his disciples? What did he just freely confess? He says, I am now. You know what it takes to make a difference? To make a change, to make an impact. Just what this man did. To speak from what you know, not be silent by fear. And that's hard. It really is. But this man spoke up, and there's nothing they can argue with because everything he said is true. And then he turns it on them. And of course, verse 28, they reviled him. And said, you are his disciple, but we are Moses' disciples. We know that God spoke to Moses. As for this fellow, we do not know where he is from. Remember, that's been the whole argument for the past 4 chapters. That you know that where he was from is from the Father, not from his teachings from the Father, all this. And they don't really know Moses. That was what Jesus said, but that's where they're trying to take their safety. Verse 30, the man answered and said to them, why, this is a marvelous thing that you do not know where he is from, yet he has opened my eyes. Now we know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, he hears him. Now, be careful with this verse. This has been pulled out of context many, many times. The context is in actually responding. In other words, Jesus spoke to God, God heard him, he got his sight. Okay? Not that he can't hear sinners, he knows everything. And we talked about that a little bit with Cornelius before he was even saved. But he's making the argument, if this man was a sinner, why would God listen to him? If he was a sinner, why would God do what he asked him to do? That doesn't make any sense, right? Verse 32. Since the world began, it has been unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of one who was born blind. Yes, I love this man. You know what one of the very particular signs of the Messiah was, according to the Old Testament? That he would give sight to the blind and hearing to the deaf. In the Old Testament, no one had ever done that. People had raised the dead. They healed various things, different prophets and so forth. But it was a very particular sign. Here's the blind beggar arguing with the elites. Sometimes we sell ourselves short. Like we've got to be this elite whatever to make a difference, make an impact. No. Just got to speak truth. Verse 33. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. They answered and said to him, you were completely born in sins, and are you teaching us? And they cast him out. Whose theology is better? Do we know what theology means? But anyways, it's a big word. It's a study of God. Whose understanding of God is better than this? The blind man or the Pharisees? I would put pretty straightforward. The blind man has a better grip on it right now, and he just got himself cast out of the synagogue. They couldn't argue with him, though. Do you notice that? They just got mad, and they cast him out. This is what happens. It happens, and we've talked about this in other places too. I remember this, and I don't know if this is the best tactic, but I find it humorous. Years ago, are you all familiar with Guy and Woods? Okay, so there were kind of two gentlemen back, mid-1900s to 50s, 60s, 70s, kind of were Guy Woods and Gus Nichols. They were two of the probably most well-known preachers in the Brotherhood. And they would have debates with each other, which were always cordial and always friendly and never whatever. But they also debated some other preachers. And I listened to a debate once with Guy Woods, and he was debating, I think it was like a Pentecostal type preacher. That doesn't matter. But he made a statement, and on one hand, it's probably maybe harsh, but it was very truthful. As they were in this discussion, he was staying calm and collective, but as it seemed like the other gentleman he was debating had no ground to stand on, couldn't refute the things that were being said, his voice kept getting louder. And the people who had come with him in the crowd, they started getting louder. And to the point where they're all shouting. And they turned it back to Guy for his comment. And he made one comment that just sticks out in my head. And he says, those who lack lightning try to make it up with thunder. And that's always stuck with me. Now, that may not be the most kind thing to say and so forth, and I know that he was ridiculing him back a little bit, but it really is true. People get upset. Not that every time that someone is upset that's wrong. We've even seen Jesus get upset. But when they start losing an argument, they don't say, oh, you know what? Maybe I'll go back and look at that and consider that. They start attacking the person. Look at what they did to this blind man. All he was doing was saying, I can see. Tell me how that makes sense. Tell me how could a man who wasn't from God be able to give me sight? And for that, they reviled him. We see that. And second, at the last part, what did they tell him? He said, you were completely born in sins. I mean, they not only trash him, they trash him coming into the world, his family, and they kick him out so they don't have to deal with him. It's a sad commentary on the reality of what we deal with the negative side of the human family. And we've gone over a few minutes, but and we've got to be careful. We find our temperature kind of rising over things. We need to pause, make sure that it's not pride taking us over. And obviously it was to them because they were being kind of shown out by a beggar, and so they saved face by tearing him down and kicking him out. And unfortunately, this will happen to us too when we stand up for things of God. But hopefully we can learn from him. I'm sorry to go over a few minutes. Let's go ahead and kind of wrap up. Any final thoughts, comments, questions before we do?
Well, I think it's coming up, but when you read verse 32, it just kind of presented that the blind man could see and the ones who could see were blind.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the way of tradition nowadays too. You can present the truth, but if you can't get over the traditions that you have, sometimes you can't see the truth.
Or preconceived understanding. In other words, you've already made a decision, and then you take and make everything fit that decision, and that's dangerous. We see it a lot. Let's do this. Let's go ahead. What song you got picked out for tonight?
21.
I don't know what song.
Come to Jesus.
Oh, Come to Jesus. That's a beautiful song. We want to, of course, always when we're together and have an opportunity, extend an invitation. We've been talking about Jesus tonight. We've been talking about the reality that traditions can blind us. And sometimes we need to take evaluation. I think the main evaluation is, do we come to the same conclusion this man did? This is the Son of God. Now, he thought he was a prophet. We know he's more. But he had only dealt with him for that one instance. He hadn't got a chance to deal with him a lot. So it's that reminder of who he is and why we follow him. And tonight, as we sing the song of invitation, if there's someone who has a need, prayers, or someone who needs to obey the gospel, as we think about who Jesus is, and sing this song, would you let those needs be known?
Come to Jesus, he will save you, though your sins as crimson flow. If you give your heart to Jesus, he will make it white as snow. Come to Jesus, come to Jesus, come to Jesus, come today. Come to Jesus, come to Jesus, come to Jesus, come today. Come to Jesus, dying sinner, of the Savior there is none. He will share with you his glory when your pilgrimage is done. Come to Jesus, come to Jesus, come to Jesus, come today. Come to Jesus.